Hi, good evening. Uh, we are in the midst of a very exciting conference, and we start our new session, which is on the Indian banking sector. My name is Sunil Singhania. In my day job, I work as a portfolio manager with Abacus. I manage almost 4,000 crores worth of AUM invested in Indian equities. Before that, I was with Reliance for a long period of time as a CIO of Reliance Mutual Fund. However, more exciting is the fact that I have two very, very distinguished gentlemen with me today. And I'm very sure that this is going to be an exciting session. First, I would like to introduce my very good friend, Ashish Chavan. I know him since NSE started operations in 1994. He is currently the MD and CEO at BSE. He is credited with reviving the Bombay Stock Exchange and setting up the India International Exchange at the GIFT City. Prior to joining BSE from 2000 to 2009, Ashish worked at Reliance Industries, India's largest conglomerate, and he was a group CIO and head of corporate communications there. He was also the cricket team Mumbai Indians, and he has requested that we end the session today at 7 so that we can all watch the match between India and England live. He is considered the father of modern financial derivatives in India due to his work at NSE from 1993 to 2000. Amongst his lot of distinguished, accolades, I think he's an alumni both from IIT Mumbai and IIM Calcutta. He's been awarded the Digital Icon of the Year, and he's also co-authored a book on the history of BSE titled Temple of Wealth Creation. Welcome, Ashish. We have also joining right from New York. So from the summer of Mumbai to on and off cold of New York, we have Viral Acharya. We all know him. Always smiling. He is a CV Star Professor of Economics in the Department of Finance at New York University Stern School of Business and an academic advisor to the Federal Reserve Banks of New York and Philadelphia. He is also very popularly known in India as a Deputy Governor of the Reserve Bank of India from January 2017 to July 2019. He is a research associate of the National Bureau of Economic Research in Corporate Finance, a research affiliate at the Center for Economic Policy Research, and research associate of the European Corporate Governance Institute. Apart from his other things which keep him busy, his primary research interest is in theoretical and empirical analysis of systemic research of the financial sector, its regulation, and its genesis in government-induced distortions. Welcome, Viral. Thanks a lot, Ashish and Viral. I think we are in the midst as far as Indian banking sector in some very exciting times. Last few years have been challenging for the banking sector. We have had issues relating to non-performing assets. At the same time, we have had huge opportunities and huge structural change with fintech and a lot of other newer subjects becoming ingrained in the whole financial services and the banking sector in India. So I'm very sure we'll try to cover as much as we can in almost 40, 45 minutes of discussion and then open it up for questions which any of you might have. So beginning with you, Viral, you have been a firm believer and advocate of reforming Indian banks. We have talked this multiple times in various forums, but I think it would be a great way to start if you can just, quickly, recap what do you mean and what do you think the Indian banking sector needs to do as far as reforming itself is concerned.
Yes, thank you so much, Sunil, and a very good evening to everyone who's in the audience. I think if you just look at the last 3 decades objectively as far as the performance of Indian banks goes, I think it can be considered as one of repeated cycles of boom and busts. They go through a cycle of excessive lending to a favored asset class or two. Then, within 4 or 5 years, it was bad. When the leverage has gone bad, you realize that banks had actually not underwritten very good loans. Just take the recent 10, 15 years. In the fiscal stimulus after the global financial crisis, banks lent a lot to infra, power, steel, etc. And, for 2-3 years, it looked all beautiful because we were growing at 8 to 10% per annum GDP growth rate. There was double digit, maybe even 20% year-on-year growth in credit at times. And it looked like we had figured out the mantra for growing growing close to double digits. And then invariably you find that in the times of excess, there has been far too much. And then there is a sort of hard landing. And the reason why we are right now at a very critical juncture, or we have been actually at a critical juncture in the last 5-6 years, is because what has happened is we have run out of things to keep leveraging up. For a while, it used to be that your certain industrial loans would be bad, and then you would go and throw money at real estate, and that house prices would start growing, and then that would take the banks out of trouble. Or, the central bank would cut interest rates a lot, and, that would give a lot of profits to banks, and, banks would tide over the problems. What has happened now is that because we have never gotten out of this cycle for close to 3 decades, the scale of the problem has become too large. We are staring at sometimes 10 trillion rupee plus non-performing loans problem. And there is no quick fix left anymore other than to reform our banks. So put simply, I think Indian banks need to be able to underwrite loans better, where they are actually balancing the risk and the return well. They are managing the risks well. And invariably, the second paradox of Indian banking, if I could put it that way, is that on the one hand, we have all these large non-performing loans problem. And at the other end, the credit to GDP of the country is rather low. It's only 55 to 60%. If you go to parts of India, especially rural, but even take big chunks of Northeast, for example, credit to GDP ratio is less than 5% in the formal credit space. So this is a real paradox, which is that we create less credit through our banking system, and we don't create that good credit, which seems kind of a very strange outcome to have in a banking system. You would think that if they're lending less, they must be growing after cream de la cream and actually not be defaulting much at all. We should have the reverse problem. We should have the problem that banks are not taking enough risk. And instead, we seem to have the problem that they are taking on too much risk and making very high losses. Last point on this, Sunil, is that, of course, in my view, a big chunk of this problem is rooted in the ownership structure of our banks. We have had public sector banks now for close to 5 decades. And I'm really not sure that this experiment has worked out well, other than for the employees and the managers at these banks. I think they've become sort of cozy places for hiring of middle-class Indians, or maybe even of some low-quality jobs, with very little productivity at the end of the day in these balance sheets, huge losses for taxpayers. In my view, government after government after government has used them for one agenda or the other, come some election or the other. And I say this, I think this has happened consistently. Otherwise, you could not have so much bleeding and lack of attention to fixing the problems. So it requires a fundamental rethink, which is, do we need public sector banks? Are our banks lending in exactly the way that they should be lending? Are they managing their risks? And how do we improve the penetration of credit in the Indian economy to the last mile?
I think some very, very excellent points. And I'll move to Ashish. Ashish, obviously, Viral touched upon a lot of very interesting observations. Apart from the low credit growth, credit to GDP growth, which we'll touch upon. But a very important point he touched upon is basically the management. And management is the ownership, public to private ownership. The government seems to be at least talking, I would say, what we need to hear, which is, keeping 4 or 5 banks in the public sector and privatizing all. So one is, interacting with millions and millions of investors and intermediaries like brokers and mutual funds in your day job, one perspective of what they are looking at and what is your perspective. And second is, you have a very revolutionary thought, whether we need banks at all. So Viral is saying we need banks, but more on the private side. But you have a revolutionary thought whether we need banks at all. So can you just highlight what do you mean by this?
I think, thank you. Good evening. Good evening to Sunil and friends in India, and good morning to Viral and friends in US and elsewhere. No, it's good to be back to IIT in some or other form, at least using Zoom. I'll tell you, when you look back, I look back the same. Only thing is, I work in India, right? And I used to be a banker too in early part of my career. And the current arguments seem to suggest that if we make the banks privatized, then there will be heaven on earth. Unfortunately, before the nationalization of banks, there were private banks only. Failed very badly. So why I'm telling you this is making something into that if you have this problem, take this medicine, and after that there will not be any side effect. I have for me and to just buttress the point. If we have all the private sector bank, which America had in 2008-9, and all of them failed on the same day, and the government of US and the society actually had to fund them. And what happens is when these banks, which are privatized, I'm not saying that public sector banks are paragons of virtue, but on the other side, you are going basically for me, you are going from one fire to another frying pan. And so, if just because you privatize them, because you have so many 3 decades of experience, I would say we have 5 decades of experience of nationalized banks, and everywhere from Kapuri Thakur's loan melas. Many of you may not have been born then. I was just born those days. So that old this banking system of public sector type is, but effectively in America, which is supposed to be the heaven on earth, had the same problem, and it has not once 2009-10. But if you recall savings and loan problem in 1990s, each time the bankers take huge profits and they take away huge bonuses. And when they are in trouble, which they unusually, they pretty much every decade 2-3 times, and probably now they will become faster and faster because the technology allows them to create accident faster. And why this happens for me, because the post World War II, the banking system came into what I call a Bretton Woods framework. Okay, you had this World Bank, and you had this IMF, and then you had central banks, and then you had banking system. The entire world, as if it was to be run, the financial system used to be run using banking, and everything else took a what I call a back seat. Before the Bretton Woods, also world used to run. Before World War I, also there used to be another framework. And so it's just that the primacy that was given in the new modern state, nation states, post World War II got a lot of credibility. One of the larger, what I call softer points, was the entire banking system, through which you impose the state onto the people and also financialize them and of course bring them up. That is the theory under which we all work, and all our books are what I call 50-year-olds. Before the 1972, the world was slightly different. Even post Bretton Woods, 1972 for me was a break point where Richard Nixon woke up on a 15th August, India's Independence Day, on a wrong side of the bed, and removed the, or at least announced that the dollar will no longer be connected to the gold. And after that, the world has gone into a tremendous sort of tailspin of what I call monetary inflation, which is also creating a lot of asset price inflation and so on and so forth. That is not the discussion, but I just want to.
But just to interrupt, can you just highlight on
just to give you So just to give you a perspective, that we have started thinking that it is the economy's solemn duty and the only duty to ensure that the banks run well and the banks make profits, and they have to be privatized, and private bankers have to keep on making money. Whenever they are in trouble, the governments, whether it is US, Europe, China, everyone has to keep on funding them. So that is the sort of talk which I keep on getting from everyone. Of course, some of them may have predicted the what I call the great financial crisis. We keep sort of to keep on them. For me, it's the other way around. Banking is a technology, and today's modern technology and what is going to go forward you need to actually cut down banks and their importance. Today, they are like aggregation of many functions. They allow you to save, they allow you to lend, they allow you to do risk management, they allow you to do transaction processing, they allow you to do foreign exchange transactions, and each time they have to get their cut. And when they don't get their cut, or they don't get the cut which they want, then the government has to ensure that they get that cut. For me, today's modern technology allows you and earlier, because the technology was not there, you had to set branches and they were costly. And that's why these great looking branches had to be opened up across modern developed countries, and India couldn't sort of open up so many branches. But today with your mobile, you can reach out everywhere. So I would rather say that banks are the albatross on the neck of modern society. And if you can actually reduce their systemic importance by ensuring that many competing agencies who allow you only to save, who allow you only to lend, who allow you only to do transaction processing, then, and it's not that the banks cannot do it, they can also participate. And for me, that's why I don't say that banks are not required. I'm just saying that allow competition in every transaction processing or every type of area in a way that all of them, including all banks, become systemically and systematically unimportant. Today, this entire discussion is coming that you have to fund them because their loans and if the next door Kirana guy goes down, does government go and fund him? No, but banks have to be done. And those guys go into big cars, good ties, great clothes, but they have to be funded and not the next door Kirana guy. And next door Kirana guy is actually funding those guys. It's a vertical irony of our modern education. And the biggest of education institutions are promoting this kind of stuff. For me, let's modern technology, especially fintech, is allowing you to do all this. And my request is, let's not create bank-centric world. It should be the world-centric banks, right? And or the economy-centric banks or society-centric banks, rather than saying that the banks are so important that it's our duty, all of us have to keep on pumping funds in them.
Right.
So that is the only.
Yeah. No, I think interesting points. It's funnily said that if you borrow $100 million in default, your life is screwed. But if you borrow $10 billion in default, the bank's life is screwed and you are in a very decent spot. So I think Ashish brings the point of too big to fail, which to some extent is true. Viral, you touched upon a few things that our credit to GDP ratio is low, and in particular, in few geographies, you pointed out Northeast India, and also some states which are backward, credit is even hard to get. And as a result of which, we have this scenario of, borrowers borrowing at 100% per annum and being exploited, and the old zamindar and the local money lender things still existing. And just mirroring and just combining it with what Ashish said, that it is very difficult to get a banking license. And therefore, you have this mushrooming up of informal and now to some extent formal, the non-banking financial companies coming up, which are in microfinance, gold finance, personal finance and all. Do you think that is a way of increasing financial literacy to some extent or financial inclusion to some extent?
Yes. Great question, Sunil. And it goes back a little bit to what Ashish was saying. See, one property of the financial system is that even with all the mollycoddling that we have done to banks, as Ashish was pointing out, financial systems have been very organic. Because ultimately, what is the financial system? There is savers' money and someone has a productive use for it. The financial system is just an intermediary in between. If the existing set of licensed intermediaries, such as banks, for example, are not able to perform this function to the society's needs, you basically get what I call as evolution of the financial system to various kinds of non-bank intermediaries. They may be entirely informal loans, or they may be what look like banks but are not called banks, but they are effectively performing banks' functions. Sometimes, of course, all this is called non-bank finance in India, or in the West, it's called shadow banking, etc. But I think the key point to me is that it's not so important what we call them. I think what is important is what is their function. And as long as a set of intermediaries are critical in the payment and settlements mechanism, and for channeling savings to the ultimate productive uses in the economy, we have extended the safety net not just to banks, but also to non-banks at different points of time. I can tell you that when I was at the Central Bank of India, the number of times we were asked to extend the safety net to mutual funds was actually more than several times, actually, in just 2.5 years, Ashish. So I think it is not the case that we are just mollycoddling banks. In fact, I think it has become a tenet of modern financial system that profits are being privatized and risks are being socialized. And I think it is true even in non-bank finance. It is true in stock market. We have had a number of bailouts of the stock market in our country through put option being provided by the central bank to mutual funds and others to stabilize them. And I think it basically shows that as long as finance is fragile, ultimately, in the end, the society gets around to actually supporting it, because its collapse would actually completely destroy this mechanism from the savers to the productive uses of the economy. Now, the reason why fintech offers a very interesting opportunity to me is not because fintech will not have the problems that banks has. In my view, a credit scoring algorithm, a non-human based intermediation function can be as fragile as the bank, because that model could be wrong, that algorithm could be wrong. An algorithm can also create excess credit in the system. And when that credit goes bad, we will be back to the square one, which is, can we actually allow the fintech intermediaries to actually all collapse because they have actually not made their loans well? It doesn't matter whether we call them banks or non-banks. I think that's besides the point. But I think it is new technology, and I fully agree with that. There has to be competition. If some entities have been granted deposit insurance and they have been granted the license to perform certain kinds of activities, it better be efficient. And if there are more efficient technologies through fintech to actually penetrate credit, provide efficient loans through apps or mobile phones, not have to set up branches, which is extremely costly. It's very costly for banks to run branches. But if we can have essentially electronic branches for all practical purposes, I think absolutely we should go down that path. I think banks will have no choice but to embrace this path, because that's reducing the costs of intermediation. I think my only word of caution would be that this idea that the traditional banking model was fragile and somehow these new intermediation models are going to be superbly stable, and therefore that is the way to go, I'm not so convinced, because I have no doubt that in 10 years' time, when we have a banking crisis, quote unquote banking crisis, it will be because of failure of fintech intermediaries. And you can write down today's date and this sentence, and I'm happy to give a brilliant coffee, beautifully made coffee as a bet on this.
See, I'll tell you, Viral will be right at least once in next 100 years. What I'm saying is, the rest of the 99 years, he will still be wrong every day. Why I'm telling you this is because my argument is, don't allow anyone to be systemically important.
No, but actually, and the
second part is on the mutual funds being saved vis-a-vis stock market being saved. In my 30 years, we have not been allowed, neither NSE nor BSE, to be allowed even in the direct clearing of the banking system. It is the mutual funds which are promoted largely by banks, which get to, and they are large people, they are systemically important. Not that exchanges are not, but exchanges have been treated extremely stepmotherly by the same Reserve Bank you said, right? I'm just telling you why, because you said mutual funds.
Yeah.
See, I can also send you SOS every day. That doesn't mean you support me. 30 years, not a single support. In fact, I told Chinese guys that China, as an army of the government, whenever their market goes down, China pumps in money into the market. In India, it will not happen ever. And I'm delighted for that, because we don't waste, as stock markets, we don't waste people's money, which the Indian banking system does, right? Because of the same reason.
No, Ashish, you made this point that, whether it is public or private, ultimately the government has to bail out the banking system, and it is at the cost of taxpayers' money, which I think Viral also touched upon. The
But
only
why
one
it
thing
does?
is
No,
that,
why it does is because systemically important. You make them large, and then
yeah, 100. I was just coming to that. I was just coming to that, it is
Yeah,
systematically
just one
important
point I
because
want to
financial,
clarify, Sunil, though, if I could just
yeah,
jump in, which is that I think all the examples you gave, Ashish, 2008 being the prime example, it is not just the banks in United States that were bailed out. A large number of shadow banks were bailed out in the United States. And I think
yeah,
I disagree that the support of mutual funds is just to bail out the mutual funds. No, the bigger fear is that the stock market is going to crash. The bigger fear when you bail out banks is not that you are giving money to the banker. The bigger fear is that credit creation and the real economy is going to crash. And this is the rationale why I think when fintech intermediaries get into trouble in future, it may be once in 10 years or in 100 years. I have no way of predicting that. My point is that if they are critical to the supply of funds from savers to the real economy, and if they are fragile, you will have the public safety net being deployed for them. Right now, they are small. But my main point is the financial system keeps organically evolving. Who is systemically important today is not the same as what will be systemically important in 10 or 20 years' time. They will ultimately become large, become systemically important, and therefore the goal has to be on prudentially ensuring that the risk management is of good type. And we can't just say because it's not banks, because it's non-banks, everything is going to be hunky-dory in that part of the financial system. That's my limited.
No, just 1 second. Shinu, you mentioned about the local mom and pop store and millions of them. And at the same time, we all appreciate that we need a regulator so that things don't go out of hand. So maybe, RBI is the guy who regulates the banks. The US Fed is the one who regulates the US financial markets. I'm very sure anyone who wants to launch a product, if it's a product we consume, they need to have an FDA approval. And if it's a different product, there is a different regulator which regulates that. So I think regulations are there everywhere. Maybe because the financial markets are very important, we feel that the regulation is a little bit tighter there. But just jumping on to your thing where you said that, why do we need banks? And, you can just liberalize it and you'll have millions and millions of it. Do you think that without regulation, things can work out smoothly? And, to Viral's point, obviously, if there are either 10 guys who have like $100 billion of balance sheet, or you have like 1 million people who have $100 million of balance sheet each. But if they all start to behave in a similar manner, then cumulatively they can be very disruptive, to the economy if something wrong goes off. And we are in this world of greed. We are in this world where everyone wants to grow faster, and we have seen on the non-banking finance side of how companies have gone belly up. So in fact, 2017-18, the time which Viral referred to, where the RBI had to come in and support the mutual fund, was largely led by mess up in the non-banking financial credit system. They were small, they were not very large, but they did have an impact. So what would your idea be of having multiple and millions of these intermediaries?
Yeah, so basically, I think regulations would be required. Like to even run a shop, you need required to go through the regulations. So I'm not saying regulations are not required. I'm saying don't allow anyone to become so large that it becomes your solemn duty to support them whenever they fail. And then they keep on failing. That's what we have seen. Although all of us committed from differently, saying, no, we have to do it because of 1, 2, 3 reasons. For me, once you allow anyone to become large, and then it becomes difficult to allow them to fail. It happened to the other way around also. India had only one airline when I grew up. When that airline staff went on strike, the elite movement closed. Today, India has like 20 airlines, and now it's not easy to stop it by going on strike. That is how I see that. All of them had regulations those days also, today also. And that's why for me, if you have smaller number, like just to give you a perspective, Yes Bank going down is a systemically important issue. But a Punjab Maharashtra cooperative bank is not a systemically important issue. That's why you don't go and support it, right? I mean, it's a decision to make, and both are working in the same city, right? But it is not, and that's why you treat them differently. One is large, that's why it becomes son-in-law in an Indian, it's sexist in a way. But in a way, it explains how not to create son-in-laws, right? And once you don't, it is easy to regulate them. If you say no, using regulations, but I don't have ability to basically stop the monopolies from happening, and then they become basically they become your liabilities. That's how I see it. Whether it is in retail, whether it is in banking, whether it is anything. Now, having said that, earlier the technology or lack of it did not allow multiple types of experiments and various ways of doing things in financial system. Today, you can do it, right? And so if we still remain, the way I look at it is most of our regulations, most of our research, most of our education is what I call based on rear view mirror. What happened in 1945? What happened in 1863, 1929? That's how our policies are made. Our research is done. For me, boss, you don't run cars looking at the rear view mirror. You also look forward. How do we anticipate the societies which are able to anticipate and use the incoming technology to their benefits are going to lead the world. They have done in the past. But all our policy making, all our education, all our research, everything is based on past. And past is not got a good guide to the future today. It may be a reasonable guide earlier.
I think it's a very, very interesting discussion. I think there is no doubt that, there is consensus that India needs more banking. There is absolutely no doubt about it. The economy is growing, maybe from 2.5, we'll be $10 trillion. The way the banking is maybe a little different. But just coming back to the current, hot topic, which is services, whether it be lending or asset management or XYZ. Viral, you have very, very interesting and different take on it. With this onset of UPI and NPCI and BEAM and all this credit rating agencies available even on the individual side, you have a very interesting concept of embedded finance. Can you just elaborate what you mean by that, and what can be the opportunity even for this young budding, fintech guys of exploiting this beautiful term?
Yes, in fact, it pretty much goes down to the stuff Ashish has been mentioning, which is how to embrace technology in intermediation. So let me just give the example of lending to micro, small and medium enterprises in India. Historically, banks have been doing a lot of paper-based processing of these loans. And of course, very often for a very micro loan, a very small amount of loan, like it could be 1,000 rupees or 5,000, 10,000, or maybe even a lakh, doing so much paperwork makes the loan making process very, very inefficient and cumbersome. And therefore, loan disbursals don't remain that attractive to banks. Second, you don't have much formal information about the micro, small and medium enterprises that's in recorded data. At least historically, that was a big problem. And third, if you think about how banks operated, they used to have what were called as direct sales agents. They would hire third-party intermediaries to go and identify which MSMEs require borrowing. Then they would have third-party collection agents to get the money back, recover on the loan from these MSMEs. Now, these third parties had nothing to do with either the bank or with the MSMEs. Now, in today's world, if we don't need to work with this sort of an underwriting, monitoring, and recovery technology for lending at the last mile, and what I've been proposing in embedded finance is that finance needs to be embedded in the ecosystem of the MSMEs. Today, the MSMEs are getting connected to GSTN network of India. They are getting connected to the government e-marketplace platform. Restaurants are getting connected to Swiggy or Zomato. Various MSMEs are getting connected to Flipkart, Amazon, and various kinds of distributors on the e-commerce platforms. Now, these platforms of the gig economy or the sharing economy, as it's called, can be very important intermediaries between banks and the MSMEs for laying over credit. Why? Because they are collecting information about MSMEs digitally. That information is getting stored. So if you have a GSTN, there's a stored GSTN invoice. The entire transaction registry on Amazon or Flipkart or Swiggy is actually digital collateral that an MSME has of its past cash flows. It doesn't need to provide paper-based information anymore. And we have other developments happening, such as a public credit registry, account aggregator from the banking regulator side, which can allow an MSME to demonstrate to the bank electronically what are its other assets and liabilities. Now, as a result of all of this, and because of having a seamless unified payment interface, what we can have in India is that these e-commerce platforms or the platforms of the gig economy can become loan service providers. They can relay the digital collateral of information about MSME to the ultimate lenders. They could be banks or fintech lenders. These lenders could have credit scoring algorithms using the information they receive to decide how much credit to disburse. Like in typical MSME credit life cycle, you will start out with smaller loans at short maturity, you observe repayments, and then you scale it up to longer term loans and larger amounts. And what is most beautiful is that payments can actually be encapsulated along the intermediary. You can actually layer the loan through the loan service provider, which is the e-commerce platform. It can just show it on the app. Then the borrower can decide which loan they want. And they can also be the repayment agents because they have business that they are doing with the MSME. The loan repayment can be bundled with their financial transactions. Now, something like this can really bring down the costs of intermediation tremendously, in my view. And, you know, with transaction records, you can improve your credit scoring models over a period of time. With transaction records, internal departments of banks and fintech lenders can do better risk management. The regulator can have almost real-time records of what exactly is happening in lending to this activity. The only point I would say is the caveat that doing fintech lending, in my view, is not a substitute for better risk management. You will still have to know what risks you are taking. Are the loans you are making of high quality or low quality? Are your interest rates high enough to recoup the losses that will arise when a cyclical downturn happens in the economy? Fintech is not a substitute for that. Fintech is a substitute for reducing the costs of intermediation. It is not a substitute for better and prudent risk management.
Ashish, you know, we are all talking about lending here, but you are running a very successful platform of raising resources. Maybe now it is for the mutual funds through your Star MF platform. But do you think in the same manner, technology can also be used to raise liabilities for the financial intermediaries? Because unless you have liabilities, how are you going to lend?
No, that's why I think this embedded finance, which Viral said, today BSE runs also incubators out of its CSR funds. And we have few embedded finance initiatives which have actually graduated from our incubator. In fact, one of the today's speakers, Rajiv Agarwal, IIT Bombay, I think in 90 batch, and then PhD also from IIT Bombay. He runs a company called Innovati out of Bangalore. And he runs, of course, payment processing part, but he also does exactly what Viral mentioned. So there are, at least in my current understanding, at least 1,000 such initiatives in finance. And for me, still, when we say no, they have to all go to the bank, is where I start worrying that why should that be a bank, right? Why? I mean, the entire world has to somehow go into the bank and make them survive, and again they can take the world for the ride. I mean, this is basically everything can be done. Why it has to be bank? That is one question I keep on asking me, that all the smartest people still want banks to have that control over what can be done, what cannot be done for whatever reasons we have. I have not been able to fathom in being a banker and later on running markets. Having said that, today BSE provides pretty much 25,000 crore a month of transactions to mutual fund industry. Not only that, BSE is now pretty much the largest platform. Almost all, 30% of all transactions done by retail people for mutual funds are going through BSE Star MF platform. And it's not compulsory. regulator says you may do it, you may not do it. The mutual funds don't want it for some reason, but still people are doing it because it's easy and stuff like that. And so there is a scale available, and we provide all 40 AMCs, all 6,000 plus schemes and stuff like that. But not many people know that this year we have raised close to 20 lakh crore in equities, bonds, and commercial paper for the corporates during the pandemic time. For many years now, BSE is larger provider of net funds to the Indian corporates by way of debt than the entire banking system. Why I'm telling you this is, the world is slowly moving into a different zone, and we'll continue to tom-tom the banking system and continue to project it. The world has slowly moved away. And if you don't basically take into account that reality, we are going to actually, the third thing which you mentioned about India needs more banking, means India needs more functions of which can be bank alike, right? It is different. Again, everyone comes to saying India needs more banking. Everything has to go through the banks. Why? I don't know. But if you have great regulations, great enforcement, great risk management, as Viral said, real time everything, banking used to do many of these functions they were aggregators. Do we need those aggregators? And that's why I'm trying to open up minds of people. Having said that, we also basically can provide more regulated way to also lend, to monitor the credit and so on and so forth on real time, because we are real time people, right? And literally we have, and the other part is that many people used to think that the stock market is a small portion of India. Banking is the largest portion, which it is still true because of Jan Dhan Aadhaar Mobile. It has now reached out everywhere, and also technology is allowed. But today, BSE has almost 6.35 crore accounts with itself. And if you say per person, there are 5 people in the family, we are already reaching out directly to almost 30-35 crore people.
Yeah.
So right. And so it's now slowly spreading the stock market, not only for the stocks, but also for mutual funds. Now we have also started the insurance distribution, because again, the same framework can be used for insurance distribution. We have also started agricultural e-markets. BSE e-market for agriculture called BEAM has just started operations. So if people want to buy and sell agricultural produce through our platform, not only for spot, I mean, spot is the most important part, but also for the futures, we should be able to do that. Why I'm telling you this is, there is much larger world happening, evolving much faster than what we think it is. But if we continue to drive our cars, all of us who have been in the business for 5 years, 10 years, 20, 30 years, and who have been taught that no, bank is the only thing we must do. The world exists because they need to support the banks. That is what.
Just getting in here, we have seen an instance where in China, for example, Ant Financial started this very revolutionary thing, which was financial inclusion also, because they were targeting, people with very small sums of money, and suddenly they became very, very big. And obviously, when they became very, very big, the Chinese government got a little bit worried, and they have started putting restrictions on it. So it's a chicken and egg situation, and I like both you and Viral to get in, first Viral and then maybe Ashish. If someone is successful, obviously they will grow bigger. And, once they grow bigger, you want to make them smaller. Same is the case with Amazon. Everyone is talking about the fact that Amazon has become too big now. So how do you manage that? And at what level you say, no, this has now become too big?
Yeah,
you really can go first.
Yeah, sure. In fact, I thought that the Ant Financial was a good example of the point I was trying to make, which is that someone can bypass banks with a better technology, better distribution. Perhaps when banks are constrained on their balance sheets to lend because they are trying to recover from losses, just as Chinese banks are, and in fact, our banks have been also over the last decade. Someone can take their role, perform banking-like functions, but the question is, once they become adequately large in the exchange of payments and settlements in the economy, which in one way or the other is settling transactions, transfer of savings to its productive uses, etc., what happens next? And I think we have seen, at least in case of China, what has happened next. And overall, I think I like the approach that the central bank in India has taken over the last 10 years, which is sort of, I would say it has differentiated the banking system quite a lot. And maybe this is a bit of I would say, a middle ground between what Ashish was saying and what I was saying, which is that we used to have only the traditional banks. Now we have small payments banks. We have, other kinds of banks which have also been set up, small finance banks, payment banks, etc. So I think the central bank has tried to differentiate the structure. Part of it is to create entry, to create competition. Some of these banks may become larger banks. Some of the microfinance banks have actually become larger banks in India now gradually. And I think as long as there is entry, there is organic growth, and there is prudent risk management, I think, the system will keep organically evolving. It may have some hard landing at times, etc. But as long as there is entry and organic growth, I think you can keep moving to the right place. I fully agree with Ashish on one point, which is that what you don't want to create is to artificially create large firms. And if I may say so, it has been my concern actually in India's technology space, where we seem to have actually artificially granted certain privileges to specific players to become very, very large over a period of time through predatory pricing policies and the like. And so I think my sense is when you go down that path, when you artificially bestow privileges on specific players to become large, then they have a much greater chance of becoming systemically important. I think public sector banks are systemically important. They've become large partly because they have the backing of the government in the deposits. If you go around surveys in India, until recently, every saver used to say, we like public sector banks because we trust these banks. Why is there of India in the name of a public sector bank? It is to build trust in the saver, that it's State Bank of India or it's your local state's bank, which is where the trust comes from that name of the bank. So they become national champions, so to speak. And I think we have to ensure that we don't build national champions out of a policy of building national champions. I think they should organically evolve into national champions through efficiency, etc., rather than being bestowed privileges. So I would say that competition is good, entry is good. We have to manage exits of intermediaries well. They cannot happen in a way that you have the payments and settlement system getting choked for weeks, because then finance collapses, economy collapses. And of course, I continue to believe that as new intermediaries evolve, the regulators will have to manage their systemic risk. I fully agree with your point, Sunil, that institutions can be systemic as a herd, even if no one is individually systemic. Right. Like the money market funds in the United States, not a single money market fund is individually systemically important, but they have identical business models. And if they fail as a group, actually the entire financial system can be in trouble. So I think that is the challenge. One last point I would say, Sunil, is that overall my view of India's evolution in the digital intermediation fintech space is more positive than that of China, because what India has done is build standards. We have built UPI. We have built standard APIs through which embedded finance can take place, the way Ashish was describing and the way I was describing it. So we have tried to set standards. We have created utility style functions in our digital architecture of the economy. And then we are allowing 1,000 flowers to bloom. China, in contrast, used the model of having one or two large fintech intermediaries perform all these functions and develop their own standards. And now they are getting into this natural trap of, okay, now does the government need to have a strong control over this intermediary? Instead, I think, and this is perhaps the spirit of Ashish's point as well, which is that if we can let 1,000 flowers bloom and ensure that, they keep blossoming rather than actually, wilting every now and then, that could be a good way to organize the financial.
Ashish, you would like to add anything here?
No, I think I pretty much agree with the last points of Viral on the Ant Financial specifically is not exactly the same as the company becoming big because of good work. China has a habit of creating national champions. And sometimes when they make noise against the specifics, then these things happen. So it's not comparable, but the idea is correct that if a entity becomes systemically important, then what to handle, right? I mean, how to handle. And I think Viral has adequately answered. I think I would add to his point that today, I spoke at UN in 2018 also. I was invited to speak on India's fintech. And I said, India today is pretty much the thought leader and execution leader in fintech across the world because of the way RBI, specifically RBI, has created that ecosystem of large payments through RTGS, and it can be also used for the small payments. But we have now RTGS, NACH, eNACH, UPI. We have created a utility which allows millions of vendors, millions of payment providers, service providers, and lenders, borrowers, everyone to basically transfer money from any bank account to any bank account of any other bank in the country at pretty much zero cost. There is no such system in the world. And we are thought leaders, we are execution leaders, and largely out of the RBI's leadership, not only in thinking, but also in creating that execution. So that today we have democratized fintech. And that is allowing, literally, like I said to you, 1,000 companies are doing embedded finance where a thought leader like Viral is trying to project in US that ऐसा करना चाहिए. हमारे लोग आके बढ़ के कर दिए. And probably 10,000 more people after today will do it because RBI has created that framework and we need to create that more. Second portion for me is a little more important, which we have not discussed, is that regulations should continue to search for that herd non-immunity or herd infection that can potentially come and create regulations against that. So even if monopoly comes, for me, monopolies and oligopolies by design or by accident or by their own hard work are bad. They cannot be tolerated in modern systems. And even if the herd becomes a monopoly, you need to keep on cutting those strings. And if the money market mutual funds all become one herd, the system, the regulator has to say, boss, beyond a point, this kind of exposure will not allow you put together. Do whatever you want. And so if you don't do phase, or I keep on worrying about our inability to force the regulations. We may have beautiful regulations with beautiful sort of thinking, but when it comes to a particular party, it doesn't get implemented, and then that blows up, and then we have an issue. And that's basically where all these blow-ups happen. As he said, one NBFC or some shadow bank is going to bring down the world next time. For me, how does it matter whether it is called bank or NBFC? If it's performing that function, it brings down the world. We should have, as regulators, been clearer enough not to allow that guy to become so large, right?
Right. Now, I think we are only 7 minutes away from the end of the session. So, guys, if you have any questions, please post it on the chat box. Just one question which keeps on coming. And, Viral, you had a thought and Ashish also had a thought of private versus public. So in short, what would be your view on privatization in the true form? Ashish had a very, very strong view that whether it is private or public, we have had cases of Yes Bank which had seen some issues and government had to bail it out. But you touched upon it. So would you support this whole move towards privatization the way the government is planning to do, where they will have 5-6 banks and the rest, everything will be in the private domain? And does it make sense for a private guy to get into it?
Yeah, I'm in general in favor of greater entry in banking. I'm in favor of actually allowing failures and their resolutions in banking. And for all the bad examples of private banks that always get given whenever privatization of public sector banks is put on table, there have also been phenomenal successes in private banking. We have some of the most profitable private banks in the world in terms of their market to book ratios and growth potential right now. So I think I think what the private system is demonstrating is exactly that the efficient players will grow and become bigger over a period of time organically, and the inefficient players will have to be resolved and get weeded out. This churn, this churn of success, failure, entry, and efficiency, which is important for intermediation to remain on its toes and keep doing its job well, is simply missing in the public sector banks. The owners have conflicted objectives. Sometimes they want growth. Sometimes they want growth at the expense of risks down the line because they have short-term political compulsions, and banks get used for doing that. And let's not fool ourselves. Public sector banks, bank nationalization did not happen because we wanted to do good for the country. The government wanted foot soldiers in every part of the country to deliver its social programs. Okay, this is the long and short of it. Then from that, it's mission creep. Then we want them to distribute X. Then we want them to distribute Y. We want them to distribute subsidies. We want them to now distribute subsidized credit to this vote bank, that vote bank. And we have just gone on and on for 50 years with this. I think, in my view, the public sector banks have basically worked only for the labor of these entities. It is now even questionable whether it's working even for the labor of these entities, because they have not been able to grow well at all. They are not able to invest in technology. They are not able to invest in upkeep of their premises. They are not able to invest in having enough staff to serve the savers and the customers on ground. So I think a fundamental rethink is needed. I think if I can just put one number on the table for everyone to think about, if you calculate the opportunity cost of taxpayer money that has gone into public sector banks over the last just 10 or 12 years, you can take the opportunity cost as either what you could have invested in a BSE index or what you could have invested in a private bank or an aggregate Nifty bank index. The opportunity cost, depending on how you calculate it, is in the range of 3.5 to 7 trillion rupees. Imagine if this much money was available to do a COVID stimulus for the economy last year. This is genuine loss of taxpayer money that's going down the drain. So we certainly have to entertain other options on the table. I think doing a few privatizations, thinking through them well, preparing a blueprint, getting public opinions on them, getting the right consulting inputs on that, doing whatever is needed to make these balance sheets better before they are privatized so that you get the right buyers and institutional investors who can turn them around. I think we have got to start somewhere. I think it's high time.
Right. Ashish, one last question before we end this session. You have been an IIT Mumbai alumni, and there are, I'm very sure, a lot of budding, entrepreneurs watching this show. So from your side, what would be the 2-3, I would say, opportunities in the fintech world, which you would, suggest or advise them to pursue, and why? We have like 2 minutes if you can just wrap it up in that time frame.
For me, the way I look at it is what is currently looking small, because the regulations don't allow you, will become very large. For me, the distribution of financial products is in a way an independent of the manufacturer of the financial products, vis-a-vis the risk manager of the financial products. All of them were combined into few entities in the past, like insurance companies or the banks or somebody else. For me, if you look at it from a different angle, that why a distributor can't distribute all, from equities to bonds to banking sort of deposits to lending products to insurance to every other thing in the world, including the distribution of real estate and distribution of vegetables and other things, right? So for me, that distribution is going to be very different from the manufacturing. And because we are running, all of us are running still the world based on the past, we think all of them have to be combined, and that's why our regulators are different of all this. They are somewhere going to get combined, like UK has done. They have created a single regulator called FSC for regulating the sort of agencies, then regulating intermediaries, the distributors separately and stuff like that. Somewhere, for me, this is all going to change. And don't worry if you start small. But if you want to be in manufacturing, you will have a good idea. I mean, start somewhere.
Right.
And today, India is in a best position technologically as a society and as an ecosystem because of the BHIM and UPI and everything else. Aadhaar, Aadhaar is beautiful. No other country has, even China doesn't have it. And that's where we are today unbelievably good. Hopefully, we as the regulators will start allowing multiple these combinations of sort of picking and choosing some manufacturers, some distributors, some this, and hopefully many of you will be able to start your own of success. I suppose, I don't know, but all is not be blamed from the sector.
Okay.
So we should keep some more blaming them, you know.
I think this was really great. We are coming to an end of our session, and Ashish particularly has to go and see the match, and I'm very sure we all also have other engagements. Thanks a lot. It was a really, really interesting session. Thanks, Viral, for joining in from New York. Thanks, Ashish. Nice to catch up with you as always. And thanks, Team IIT, for giving all of us a great opportunity. Have a great evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.